Breaking news, in a huge victory for voting rights, a mass voter challenge lawsuit in Georgia was dismissed. Welcome back to Democracy Docket. I'm Marc Elias.
And I'm Paige Moskowitz. Let's get started. 2 Georgia Republicans filed a lawsuit to challenge the eligibility of every single voter in Fulton County, over 100,000 people, before the election. Marc, what was their reasoning?
Their reasoning was that they wanted to challenge voters, right? I mean, we have to separate out the wheat from the chaff here, and this was a lot of chaff. This was a lawsuit that is part of an overall pattern that we are seeing around the country, and it's not just in Georgia, but it started in Georgia after 2020. And it has had its most pernicious effects in Georgia, but we are now seeing it in at least 9 states as we move forward towards 2024, of people challenging voters who they do not know, who they have never met. This is literally right-wing activists, some allegedly working with the Republican Party, others working with other grassroots organizations, some working by themselves, who troll through voter records and compile these long lists, spreadsheets of names of people who, again, I want to reiterate, these are people they do not know and they have never met. They don't know them, right? But they put their name on a spreadsheet. They send it to the county with a reason for why they don't believe that person should be eligible to be registered or be allowed to vote, depending on the state. And they seek to have them removed from the rolls or have their ballot discarded, again, depending on the state. It is a pernicious effect, second order effect of Trumpism from 2020. And it is something that we have been fighting in. My law firm and I have been fighting in court for years. We were involved in representing the parties that intervened in this case. And it is very important that everyone is educated about this issue of mass voter challenges. There was just a story page in the New York Times, and we'll put a link to the New York Times story in the show notes, in which True the Vote, which is one of the major organizations that sort of advocates or engages in voter challenges, they said they have already challenged 640,000 voters now, or registrants. Like I can't confirm that number. That number seems very high relative to what we've been tracking, but it is clearly in the hundreds of thousands, and that number is going to grow.
What is the basis of these voter challenges? Did the plaintiffs give reasons as to why they think these voters are ineligible? And why were they able to challenge so many people at once?
Yeah, look, their argument is that the voter rolls are not clean, that as a result, the citizen vigilantes have to do the job that the counties are not doing in keeping their voter rolls clean. And again, that's just like a very dangerous mindset. It is a very dangerous mindset when we start to have these right-wing vigilante organizations or individuals engaged in, trying to administer elections rather than the states administering elections. So we've seen examples of this with voter intimidation out west in the 2022 election. We've seen this around certification challenges in the aftermath of elections. And we've seen this with all the conspiracy theories we see online. But in this instance, their argument was that the county is failing to clean the voter rolls, and therefore they have to be filing these challenges. Now, you would think, Paige, that Georgia, having been the epicenter of these challenges that started in the aftermath of 2020, would have cracked down on this. And by 2024, we would have, they would have prevented these kinds of things. But quite the contrary. I mean, Georgia passed a law in 2021 that became very famous, SB 202, because it did all kinds of voter suppression things. But one of the provisions, actually, I wrote an article at the time, and hopefully we'll put it in the show notes, saying that the worst provision of a very bad law was the provision that allowed for easier mass challenges. And so that was put in the law in 2022. Then in 2024, earlier this year, Georgia again amended their law to make it again easier still to challenge and harder to defeat these challenges. So Georgia, rather than crack down on this, they are in some ways encouraging this. And Paige, I think we have to tie this back to a larger topic that you and I have discussed, which is why Republican states, rather than embracing interstate collaboratives like the ERIC program, instead sort of pulled out of ERIC and, have retreated from those kinds of programs in order to in order to spread and facilitate some of this misinformation and disinformation about voter rolls.
Georgia has remained a member of ERIC, this interstate organization that helps states maintain their voter rolls. But a lot of other Republican-led states have left. Huge states like Texas, where you can imagine there's voters moving in and out of the state every year, left that group. That makes their voter rolls less likely to be entirely accurate because they're not getting the same information.
And it also means that Texas's information is not available to Georgia, which is part of why I made this point, right? Even if Georgia stays in ERIC, when other states leave, it makes it a less effective program.
Right. And it's also because ERIC uses information like national change of address forms to see voters who have moved, but they send that information to state officials to verify themselves to see if a voter has actually moved. The problem with election vigilantes is they don't verify that information. They just take it as fact and say that this national change of address form means that this person has moved and that they're no longer eligible to vote, even though there's a variety of reasons why someone may temporarily have their mail forwarded and they remain valid, eligible voters in their home state.
Yeah. And look, I think it's important to recognize that one of the two plaintiffs in this lawsuit challenged 10,000 voters last year. And that same person who brought this lawsuit was actually nominated by the Fulton County Republican Party twice to sit on the county election board, and was rejected both times. So did not. But it gives you some sense of the sort of the ideological overlay of these efforts and just how closely they align between the individual actors, the ideological actors, and the partisan players.
Right. This man wasn't some fringe individual who was doing this on his own. He was known by the local Republican Party and nominated to be an election official in the county. But Marc, tell us what happened in this lawsuit. Where does it stand now?
All right. So this is a good news story in many respects because it shows the power that the courts can have in making sure that the right thing is done for voters. So this lawsuit was filed by these two individuals on August 28th. On September 11th, my law firm representing the new Georgia Project Action Fund intervened as a defendant, essentially to prevent this lawsuit from proceeding and winning. And on the following day, our motion to dismiss was filed and accepted by the court. And then 4 days later, the lawsuit was voluntarily dismissed. So, I think it goes to show that when these lawsuits that are aimed at sowing confusion and doubt and misunderstanding, they're aimed at, disenfranchising voters. They are aimed at, in this case, voter challenges. That when they are confronted with aggressive pro-democracy lawyers on the other side, that the courts more often than not will stand up. Now, in this case, the court didn't even have to stand up. In this case, the plaintiff's lawyer saw the motion to dismiss and frankly did the right thing for his clients. He dismissed it because it was a legally deficient lawsuit. And so that is where this lawsuit stands. But it doesn't mean that these same plaintiffs won't come back and refile another lawsuit. It doesn't mean that other groups won't be in court doing something similar. And look, this is the reason why in 2020 I created Democracy Docket. I hope everyone is subscribed to its free daily and weekly newsletters. There is a team of 15 people who every day work to keep you up to date on the latest news and happenings with democracy in court. And there is no more urgent time in our history to be up to date on those things. So please subscribe now. It is free and the links are in the show notes below.
As we get closer to the election, could we still see mass voter challenges? Like, could someone go and challenge my voter registration on October 1st, and then I go to vote in person on November 5th, and I'm told that my registration is no longer valid because it has been challenged?
No, right. So we are in a period that under the National Voter Registration Act, sometimes referred to as Motor Voter, sometimes referred to as NAVRA, but under that law, there cannot be these purges of voters, these mass removals of voters in close proximity to a federal election. So we are within that window of it being too late for mass purges or for mass removals. The Department of Justice recently issued guidance that sort of reminded states of this law and made clear that the mass removal of voter challenges is prohibited by the National Voter Registration Act. States, frankly, should already know that. Counties should already know that. This is a very important law to them in a number of respects for how they administer elections. But that should be the case in all 50 states.
If you are concerned about your registration being challenged, what should you do?
Look, the advice I give everyone, and I'm going to repeat it here, is whether you are concerned or not, at some point in the next few weeks, check to make sure your voter registration is active and proper, okay? Go on your local county or state governmental website and check your voter registration status. If you are not registered, make sure you register. If you are registered and there is some issue with it that you see, call or take the necessary steps to make sure you are registered. And then have a plan to vote, because just like there have been changes in many states about how voter registration works and errors can be made, there have also been changes in a lot of states in how voting works. Some states have made it easier, some states have made it harder. Some states and counties are closing polling locations or moving polling locations. Some are adding vote centers. So have a plan to vote. Know where you're going to vote, how you're going to vote. Are you going to vote by mail? If so, what's the deadline to ask for a ballot? What's the deadline to return it? Are you going to vote in person early? What are the hours for in-person voting early? Where do you vote in person early? What documentation may you need to bring? And same with election day voting, if that's what you plan on doing. What are the hours? What are the requirements? What are the locations? So have a plan to vote. But above all else, don't let the bad guys convince you it's not worth it. Okay, voting is essential. It is part of citizenship in this country, and it is vital that each and every one of us make our voice heard this November. Thank you, everyone, for joining this edition of Democracy Docket, and we will see you next time.